You're listening to episode 57, Amanda's Story, a NICU stay for micro preemie twins born at 23 weeks. Hi, and welcome to the Child Life On Call podcast. When your child is sick, the whole world seems to stop in its tracks. Plans and priorities change, and your number one job becomes figuring out how to get your child well again. For some of us, rest, medications, and relaxation can do the trick. But for others, it takes more. It takes countless doctor appointments, invasive medical testing, therapy, surgeries, the list goes on, and then you still may not have all of the answers or results you were hoping for. This podcast features parents of children that have an illness or medical condition and gives them a place to share their own journeys and experiences. We will talk about the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows, but one thing seems to remain the same. Children are resilient and teach us more about ourselves and the world than we could ever imagine. Thank you so much for lending a listening ear and opening up your heart to these families and this podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor.
That was helpful that they thought to prep us as best they could for some of these expectations about, not really being able to touch your child and what they may look like when you see them in their incubator. And it's very different from these 36, 40-week babies that are plump and healthy and crying, and your kids can't cry because they are intubated. They have their breathing tube, and you can't really talk to them too much or touch them too much. They didn't want them to be overstimulated. So really all we could do is sit next to their incubator for couple weeks and pray. And that was it. That's all we could really do. And it's very challenging as a parent, because it almost goes against everything that you think you should be able to do for your child, and it's just not the experience that you ever desired for you or your child, certainly.
Hello, everyone. I am Katie Taylor, host of the Child Life On Call podcast, and you just got to hear a little snippet from Amanda's story. So we're going to hear from her in just a few moments, and truthfully, talking with Amanda just made me realize that whenever you meet someone else who is going through life, right, we're getting a snippet of their day. We're getting a moment in time where we get to know them and see how they're reacting. But they have a whole other experience and story that leads them up to this moment. And the reason I bring this up is because Amanda's story begins not when her twins were born at 23 weeks. It begins in the planning stages of their family and what it takes to actually get pregnant. And, as healthcare providers, when we are meeting families, we're getting this tiny little window into their life, but there is so much experience before that has brought them to this moment. And parents who are listening, I want you to think about, as you're listening to Amanda's story, how you could advocate for yourself in these kind of scenarios. So you know your child best, and you have experience with them that we could not even imagine. So while the providers that you're working with may be the experts on the condition or the diagnosis or the hospital stay or the medication, you are the expert on the child. And it's so important for you to speak up and tell us your experience, tell us what you need, so that we can in turn provide your family with the best care possible. So I think it's so important, and Amanda does just an amazing job of walking us through beginning to where they are now and the impact that those experiences had. And you'll hear her talk a lot about her faith and the importance and actually the necessity that having faith in her religion was as she kind of moved forward through this time. So if you are here, I'm so glad that you're here. Know that you can follow us on Child Life On Call on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. We try to give resources and share information and experiences as much as possible to help parents feel less isolated. So we're a community here, and we're just so happy that you're here, and I can't wait to introduce you to Amanda.
My name's Amanda Thomas. My husband is David Thomas. We met at Baylor University and got married at age 23, 24. We spent the good part of our first few years of marriage in school. So I went to physician assistant school and he was in physical therapy school. So we didn't start trying for a family, I suppose, until I guess later. We got pregnant easily with our first. His name is Mason. He's now 6, and he was a joy. The pregnancy was easy. The delivery was easy. He came at like 36 weeks, but he was perfectly healthy and has been healthy. Fortunately, we were blessed with him in a very easy way. Then we started trying to get pregnant a year after that. So Mason's first birthday, we decided we wanted to try for another child. And that process pretty soon afterwards became clear that it was not working, and it was really my body that was not working well. I could tell based on my cycles and all that things were not working as they should. So fortunately for us, my doctor recognized that before that quote unquote 1 year mark that you have to get to prove that you are having fertility issues. And I was able to get testing done, which confirmed that I was not ovulating. Unfortunately, there wasn't a reason for it to quote unquote treat, but we did a couple of cycles with a medication called Clomid that failed. Then we went to fertility specialist, which was a different world, certainly. And I think once you have a baby as easily as we did, we never thought we would be in that kind of room having those kinds of discussions. But there we were, and we started our treatments, and we were fortunate enough on our third IUI round to get pregnant with Luke and Levi. So I had actually just switched jobs and was so very sick. So we thought there was a chance, and there's a increased chance of twins with fertility or multiples with fertility. So we knew that going in, and still shocked. I think any mom or dad is shocked when they tell you there's more than one in there.
Right.
But we were very excited because we had prayed for another child for our family. And as many parents who have been through the fertility journey know, I mean, it's very grueling and it's very taxing on not only your mental health, but your relationship. It's very challenging. And we were very blessed and very excited. We kind of continued on with our normal life. I didn't really, besides feeling very nauseated, I wasn't really having any issues with the pregnancy. Everything was looking good. I had gone out of town with a couple of girlfriends to Arizona around, I don't even think we had told everyone we were pregnant yet. So pretty early on still. And I woke up one morning and I felt like my water had broken. I had that with my first child when I went into labor with him, and it felt like my water broke. So I went to the ER there, and they didn't really have anything to say except, the babies are still there and you're going to have to fly home and see your doctor. There wasn't really anything to do at that point. So I thought I was miscarrying and would have to fly home to Dallas. And I tried to get home as soon as I could because all I wanted to do was just be with my husband for support in case that's where things were headed. So I landed, and of course it was a weekend, so I couldn't see the doctor until the next day, but they found a polyp and removed that off of my cervix and thought that was it, and that was why, and the bleeding stopped at that point. And so we were very thankful that that's all we thought was going on. So we, again, kind of continued down the road. I had some on and off bleeding still that persisted, not quite as much as that episode, but it was definitely a more stress-inducing pregnancy than my first, because I thought at any moment I was going to lose them. We fortunately made it to our 20-week anatomy scan. Everything was perfect. When the sonographer did my ultrasound, however, and looked at the length of my cervix and all that, it looked like my cervix was shortening. So they had me follow up pretty soon after, and it had shortened more. So at that point, I was put on bed rest, but I was able to be at home, which was very nice. I think all moms think, okay, this is going to be great. I'm going to rest in my bed and, I'll get a break. And it was great for about 2 hours. And then, bed rest is no fun after that.
Mm-hmm.
But I did what I was told, and my husband stepped up to the plate and took care of everything. And we're fortunate that we have both of our families here, and they took care of us, and we did what we needed to do. And we were fortunate enough to have support around us to make that happen. Unfortunately, when I did my follow-up with the specialist, I went in, and the sonographer came in and was talking all about how perfect the boys looked and how great their measurements were. And then she went to my cervix, and there was nothing there. I could see it, and her face just dropped, and she said she needed to leave the room to get the doctor. And of course, everyone knows in that situation, it's never going to be good news, right? So he comes in and says, well, you are going straight to the hospital now. You can't do bed rest at home anymore, which we understood. So we drove straight to the hospital where I was admitted. The doctors came in, a slew of them, my OBGYN, the specialists, the NICU doctors. It was very overwhelming, to say the least. But at that point, I was not in active labor. So I think there was a big hope that I could be on bed rest and ride this thing out. Then I started having contractions. And so then they admitted me to the L&D floor, where they gave me magnesium, which is an awful drug. It's perfect at doing what it needs to do, which is stopping labor, but the side effects are really awful. I was very sick. My blood pressure dropped to like 60s over 30s, and it was a very scary moment for David, I think. And I was kind of vomiting and almost passing out, and it was very awful. But I think it did its job, and then it kind of slowed down my contractions. But my contractions persisted, and they were somewhat regular. So I think the NICU doctors then came in and proceeded to kind of ask us the question that you will get, around that time of your pregnancy. If the boys come, do you want us to try to save them, or do you want to let them pass? And that's a pretty awful conversation to have. I appreciated the NICU doctors. They were very straightforward. Their expectations were clear. If I were to give birth that day versus if I were to give birth, at 28 weeks, their lungs would be in much better shape. And that was really the goal. We were trying to get to 28 weeks. But they understood, and we understood that there was a big chance that I wasn't going to make it to that point. So they went through, their percentage of complications, lung complications, brain bleeds, infections, obviously the rate of death. And it was a very surreal conversation. And our OB, who I adore, was in the room. And she shares a very similar faith to us. And she said, yes, you guys need to do everything you can. And we felt the same. I mean, I think as a parent, it it's hard to say, no, don't do everything. We wanted them to do everything that they could. And we understood that they may not make it. And if they did, it would be a very complicated, or could be a complicated journey. So David and I prayed, and it was tough. I told the Lord that these were his children, and if he needed to take them, to take them. But David felt very confident and very at peace that they would be okay. And I've never quite seen David so calm as I did in that room that night. And I poured out my soul to the Lord, and I gave those kids to him, and David gave those kids to him, and we moved forward. We said, yes, we want you to do everything that you can. The NICU doctors were amazing. We were so blessed to be in the hospital that we were in, because he said our rates of success are higher than, some other hospitals. So we felt very comfortable. So we moved on from that night. I was able to be on bed rest in the hospital for a few more days. And then they abruptly came on July 31st at 23 weeks and 6 days. They almost made it to 24 weeks, few hours short of 24 weeks. The C-section, I had an emergency C-section. My OB, who was not on call but lived close, drove up. Then we had another OB that was on call. So there were a lot of people there. Unfortunately, Luke, my twin A, as we would call him, decided that he wanted to come very abruptly. So he did not wait for anyone except for the anesthesiologist, and I had not yet had my spinal put in. So it was a very traumatic emergency C-section, and they actually called Luke a breech C-section because he was trying to come out of the canal, and they had to pull him back out through the C-section. So it was a very scary, surreal moment, and the NICU docs were all there. Their teams were there. They took pictures, which was very nice because you're not certain what's going to happen in those few minutes and what's going to happen the next few hours. If, your boys are going to be able to be intubated, and if not, they certainly wouldn't make it. So it was a very traumatic C-section delivery, and I did suffer from nightmares from that experience for a while. It was definitely a moment where you feel completely out of control and you have nothing to give your children to help them. It's a very helpless feeling, and you are just praying that the people that are in that room with you can do everything that they can to save your kids, and there's nothing you can do except for pray. And we did pray, and we prayed some more. And luckily, both boys were able to be intubated successfully, which allowed, their breathing to continue. And they put them in their little incubators, and off they went to the NICU. It was, a good feeling that they were able to be taken to the NICU, that we were able to at least make it out of the delivery room. But certainly that began our journey of uncertainty every day. And they will tell you this most of the time when you go into the NICU, that every day is different. Every baby is different. Nothing is the same potentially 24 hours later than it was. Things can change very quickly. They also told us about this quote unquote honeymoon phase that will last like the first 24 or 48 hours, where your kids seem to be doing okay right after you deliver. And then the honeymoon phase ends and the complications start up. So we were prepared. I think the problem for most, I should say, I don't know, most women, but I was on a lot of pain meds. My C-section was quite traumatic. So I was in a lot of pain. So I wasn't really super aware those first couple of days of what was really going on. And you're very sleep deprived and you're trying to breastfeed because certainly you want your micro preemies to get all the support they can, and you're hoping that your body's going to make enough milk. And that was a stress as well. I'll never forget the NICU doc came rushing into our room at like 3 a.m. a couple of days after they were born, and Luke had a significant lung bleed. And I didn't understand what she was saying. I was on some pain medication and didn't really fully appreciate what she was saying. And luckily David was there and was able to go and be with him. But it was challenging, I think, because I couldn't even walk very well. To try to get down to the NICU from my room was even a challenge. But eventually, you heal up from your surgery. But those first few days of just not really knowing, and then not being able to be as present as you feel like you need to be, because you're trying to recover from your delivery. Or for me, that was very challenging. And I think back on those times, and it just makes me sad that I wasn't able to be near them as much. But eventually, I was able to kind of get down to the NICU, and we were fortunate enough to live not too far from the hospital. So even when I was discharged, I was able to get to the hospital fairly easily and regularly. But certainly no mom and no dad wants to leave a hospital without your baby or your baby. So that was another challenge, I think, that we were not quite emotionally prepared for, was coming home and you don't have your babies with you or your baby. It's just so different from a normal delivery, where you get that skin to skin time right off of the bat, and you get to drive home with your baby, and all that bonding time is really taken away, and you're not given that opportunity for multiple reasons, but obviously for the safety of your children kind of at first. But again, we were fortunate enough that the NICU team had really prepped us for this, and that was helpful, that they thought to prep us as best they could for some of these expectations about, not really being able to touch your child and what they may look like when you see them in their incubator. And it's very different from these 36, 40-week babies that are plump and healthy and crying, and your kids can't cry because they are intubated. They have their breathing tube, and you can't really talk to them too much or touch them too much. They didn't want them to be overstimulated. So really all we could do is sit next to their incubator for couple weeks and pray. And that was it. That's all we could really do. And it's very challenging as a parent, because it almost goes against everything that you think you should be able to do for your child, and it's just not the experience that you ever desired for you or your child, certainly.
I've had a lot of parents tell me that exact same thing, that leaving the hospital that first time without your babies is the hardest walk of your life, and getting in the car and getting home, and because you're not pregnant anymore, but you're still feeling like you're pregnant. You still have those hormones. There's a lack of control with what's happening at the hospital when you're not there to be able to see it and interact with the doctors. And that walk down the hallway to leave your babies doesn't really ever get easier. Even after a week stay, 2-week stay, a 3-month stay, the walk is still really difficult, but you do learn how to adapt to it. And you can start to trust the NICU more. You can start to trust your doctors and your nurses more. So leaving never gets easier, but you have a better understanding of the environment. So leaving it doesn't feel like you're leaving a foreign country and leaving your baby there. You just, you get what's happening more, and that actually can be helpful.
Mhm. Absolutely. The NICU team, the NICU nurses, I mean, those are our angels on earth. They are so kind and generous with their time and explaining how things typically work and supporting you in the times of uncertainty. I found it extremely helpful that most of the NICU nurses were quite grounded and very realistic, and they were not filling us with false hopes, if that makes sense, because I'm a very realistic person, and I needed people around me to support me, but that were also very honest in what was happening, so that I could truly understand what was going on with our boys day to day. As I said, every day is so different, and the infections, the bleeds, the scans, the pokes, my gosh, those poor NICU babies, the pokes, the blood draws every day. You know, their IVs are placed sometimes on their head, which is so very different from where you see IVs everywhere else. It's very alarming when you're seeing your baby getting all this done. But when they explain to you why they're doing this, how it's being done, I think it makes it easier to accept this is your reality now, because you go into survival mode. You want the best for your kids and you want the best treatment. And for me and David, fortunately, with our medical backgrounds, I was very comfortable with everything they were telling me and understood. Some of our friends that we made in the NICU did not have that medical background. I think they found that a bit more challenging. So we felt very blessed to be able to understand some of what was going on. Certainly, we didn't understand everything. NICU babies are very different and their needs are very different. I think the one thing that sticks out is their oxygen needs is very different. The alarms that go off all the time is very different. And I will never forget the alarm sounds in that NICU. I will never forget them. And when you are around your baby and you're seeing their oxygen drop and you're seeing their heart rate go all over the place and these alarms are beeping, and it is just the worst feeling as a parent. That you can do nothing to help that you put your full reliance on the NICU team and you just have to sit there. I can remember vividly holding Luke, and we were in a NICU that had pods. So there wasn't private rooms. There was about 6 to 8 babies, and each one had their little space all in the same pod. So what that means is you could see other babies, you could hear other babies' alarms. On one hand, it was nice because you knew you were not alone. On the other hand, it was very hard because you could see other parents come in with their 38-weeker who spent 12 hours in the NICU and was discharged that day, and you're sitting there wondering if my child's going to make it to the next day. So it has pros and cons, but I can vividly remember a time I was holding Luke, and this was one of the first times I held Luke, and you have to be very careful when they're intubated. It's almost like you have to freeze like a statue the whole time that you're holding them, because you don't want to be the reason that their breathing tube comes out, and it's very stressful. And you realize how fragile they are. And I remember Levi's tube came out, so I'm holding Luke. I can't move. The nurses and the team are over at Levi's station trying to re-intubate, and I can hear his alarms going off and his oxygen's dropping and his heart rate's dropping, and it was I just fell apart. Just fell apart. which the nurses will say, I mean, very normal to fall apart. Fortunately, they were able to reintubate him. But when I say every day is so different, I think that's very true for a lot of the babies that are born, particularly the micro preemies. There's not a good way to predict. I was told when we first got there, me and my husband are both Caucasian, and they have a term called wimpy white boys in the NICU, where these Caucasian males tend to do the worst out of all of the babies that come through. And we had 2 of them. So that was already kind of at the forefront of our minds that we were going to be going down a difficult path. But you tend to kind of get used to the alarms. At some point, they just become background noise, and you learn very quickly to not get attached to those alarms or attached to your baby's oxygen level at that moment, because they bounce up so often and down. Mm-hmm. But you do learn to go into this somewhat survival mode, and I think that's obviously a protective for you, but I definitely did go into that. And I had this mindset of, we just have to get through this and get through this and get through this. And hindsight, I wish I would have appreciated the NICU a little bit more. I do think it's a place where you can really learn to rely on others in a very different way and accept support from other people. You can reach out to other parents, other moms, and give support to people that are coming in after you or dealing with things that you haven't dealt with in the NICU, but you're there for them in a way that other people can't be, because you are now living in that world with them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why having the pod became so helpful, as we got to know many parents and their babies through the NICU, and every journey was so different. And unfortunately, some of our friends lost their baby in the NICU, and I think you see things you never wanted to see, never wanted to experience, and it makes you stronger. It does. But I definitely have a whole new respect for NICU nurses and doctors and everyone that works in the NICU. I mean, the strength that they provide to the babies and the families that come through there is just fairly amazing. It's pretty amazing that they dedicated their lives to this. Pretty awesome.
I have a question about, you talk so highly of the way that the NICU team prepared you and communicated with you. And I think about a parent who is listening to this who doesn't quite know how to find their voice or what to ask for or how to advocate. But maybe if you had a couple things that you liked the way a team communicated with you, whether it was in my NICU, we have tuck-in calls. So we call, kind of before that bedtime feeding, and we call it the tuck-in, and that's how we talk to families. Some families really like it. Some families prefer like resources when they come in and have everything written down. What worked for you in terms of communication that may give an idea to another parent?
I think what helped me, and I do think this is how I'm designed to think. I think everybody has their certain styles as far as kind of dealing with stress and certainly dealing with their children and these kind of uncertainties. But it helped me for the NICU team to really lay out in a very easy to understand manner about what the day-to-day would look like initially. Mm-hmm. It helped for me to understand, okay, when you see your baby for the first time, this is what they're going to look like. Mm-hmm. This is what's going to be their environment. This is where the IVs could be if you see this on their head. I mean, that I didn't I had only worked with kids and adults before. I had never seen an IV in a head.
Yeah.
Or this is what their skin tone is going to look like. This is how their feeding is going to look like. For me to have that visual explanation, if that makes sense. So an explanation of what I was going to be seeing visually before I even walked through the NICU door was helpful to kind of lay the groundwork of what I would be looking at. I think as a parent, you give birth, and the labor and delivery room is very busy and it's very quick. And if you have preemies or micro preemies that require immediate intervention to keep them alive, you are not going to be able to see them for very long, and you're not going to be able to appreciate what they look like. And certainly when they first come out versus what they look like in their incubator, it's very different, because now they have everything hooked up to them. You have 5 alarms, you have wires running everywhere. And to have someone explain that this is what your baby's going to look like, and this is normal for a NICU, and this is normal for this age, was helpful. Because I think when you see them for the first time, your automatic thought is, this is not normal. I shouldn't be in here. My baby shouldn't look like this. They shouldn't have everything hooked up to them, right? That's just, I think, a natural thought process. But for them to explain and really ground me in my expectations of what could take place, I think it was helpful, albeit one of the hardest conversations of my life, from the NICU doctor explaining some of the complications that they could see in a baby that's born as early as my twins were, because it set the expectations for what they were testing for, why they were doing scans on the brain and ultrasounds and all that stuff, and taking their blood all the time. Because I think in your mind, you're like, why are you taking more blood from this baby that's only 1 pound? I mean, there's nothing in there, right? And for them to really explain what they're watching for and what they're looking for and why they're doing it was very helpful. And again, I mean, I think we were blessed to have a medical background, so I understood. But I think the biggest thing is when it first happens, especially for these emergency deliveries where you're not really expecting to be in the NICU that night. You thought, maybe in a few weeks or a few months, hopefully you would be there, but not then. It does all happen very fast, and the shock of it is very challenging. So I do think that NICU team really, really setting those expectations was helpful to at least kind of get us through those first few days, because it is a very shocking time where it's hard to believe that you're even where you are, and it's hard to believe that your child where they are. It's a very hard reality to accept.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It's, when you're not totally sure about what's going to happen in a situation, any kind of details that you can hold on to and understand beforehand can help you when you get there. So, I mean, it makes total sense that kind of preparation would be helpful. And I had another question for you, just thinking about kind of, the alarms that you're talking about and the length of stay. I want to hear what the boys' lengths of stays were. But throughout that time, how did you take care of you when you went home? I know you had Mason at home, but what helped you? You said, we just got to get through this. We just got to get through this was kind of your motto when you were there. But how did you get through it?
Honestly, Mason was the biggest blessing. He was such a great distraction from everything. And he was always so busy and still fairly young and required a lot of our attention at that time. So that was a big blessing. I do think the support of our family was very important and very helpful, and we were blessed with that. I think we realized in the NICU very quickly that not everyone has that. So we felt very blessed by that. I will say the biggest thing for me and David personally is our faith. And fortunately, we share the same faith. I don't think I've ever prayed so hard, prayed so consistently, thought about God's will as much as I did during that time. It was such a bittersweet experience, I think, as a person of faith, because you're going through such a struggle that you certainly do not want to go through, and certainly don't want to see your children go through. And you never wanted to be in a NICU. You never wanted to be there. No one ever wants to be in a NICU. But I've never felt the presence of God like I did when I was in that NICU. So I do think that honestly is what carried David and I through. And I think for a lot of parents in the NICU that have a faith, whatever faith that may be, I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to rely on in a time where you feel at your weakest. And it can be very isolating because you may not know people that have gone down this road before. Me and David did not know anyone that had micro preemies. We did have a friend who did have twins in a NICU in the years ahead of when we were, and she reached out immediately, and that was very helpful. But I think our reliance on our faith was the biggest thing and the most consistent thing that we turned to during that time. I think logistically speaking, we had a church that surrounded us very quickly and a Sunday school class that surrounded us very quickly and provided us with a lot of meals and gift cards that we found extremely helpful, because when you're trying to work and you're taking care of other family members and trying to get to the hospital, there's not a lot of time for cooking and cleaning and laundry and all that stuff. So I do think it was extremely helpful to be surrounded by so much support, kind of logistically speaking, just to provide meals for us was big. But yeah, I think I'll go back to it all the time. Our relationship with Christ was the thing that carried us through, and he was with us, and we knew, because not every parent, I think, understands, certainly. But I think when you're in that position and you feel so helpless and isolated and alone, it is a very dark time. And the only light that we had was him, and he provided us with peace and comfort that nothing and no one else could have provided us with. And that's what I say when that was the sweet side of the bittersweet journey for the NICU for us, was that awareness of his presence consistently, and the amount of people that were praying for us, the fact that we ended up with 2 wimpy white boys born at 23 weeks with not a lot of complications and discharged, yes, with oxygen, but other than that, they did well. It's nothing short of a miracle. I mean, and to have two of them is just, to me, and I think most NICU parents would say that, you feel like your baby's a miracle, a living miracle. And I will just never forget that part of our journey is that relationship and that faith that we relied on.
I've had so many parents share the importance of faith in something during a time like that. And, having the privilege to work in a NICU, work in a hospital, work in pediatric care, and be amongst both like the most devastating times for families and some of the most beautiful times for families. Certainly the higher presence of God can be felt by so many people there. And I love how you described that. Like, you've never felt him more than when you were in the NICU. And I think a lot of people share that experience when they're observing miracles all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh, it's true. It's true.
talk to us about, kind of the end of your stay and going home on oxygen, which I know those last few weeks for families before discharge, if they have a micro preemie, it's like the oxygen game of going up and down, will we, won't we, is just the emotional turmoil. It's almost like when you like, am I going to give birth? Am I not? Are they going to, it's just, that is so
Right,
hard.
right.
Talk to us about the reality of taking babies home on oxygen and what is that actually like?
Oh gosh. It was expected. We were prepared to bring them home on oxygen. The amazing thing about our twins is we were actually all set to be discharged on the same day, which was
Another
miraculous in
miracle.
and of itself for two twins to be going home on the same day. So we did our overnight stay at the hospital and everything went really well. They do a wonderful job. The respiratory therapist in particular, I have to give them the credit of giving us all the information we needed about their oxygen and what that would look like at home versus what it looked like in the hospital, because it's very different. And the alarm at home is much louder, I will say. For us, that was a challenge. But the morning that we were supposed to be discharged, all of our doctors and nurses were coming in to say goodbye, and it was going wonderful. They're still connected to kind of everything as far as their heart rate monitor and all that. And then Levi went into SVT, which is a type of tachycardia or a fast heart rate, which he had done before once in the NICU, but that had been some time ago. So unfortunately for us, Luke was able to be discharged that day, and we had to make the long walk back to the NICU with Levi and be readmitted. Gosh, that was devastating.
Oh, Amanda.
And I will say, when they tell you that every day is different and be careful to make expectations, it happens up until the last minute.
Yeah.
These babies can change their path in literally a heartbeat. And that was challenging because we were all set and we had everything ready to go and prepared and had to do that walk back to the NICU and be readmitted. And I did break down in the hallway. You think you're done and you're not. We were blessed that it happened at the hospital, so we could just be readmitted right straight back to the NICU. But that was awful. But again, I think we recognized how blessed we had been with our boys. They had not had a very complicated NICU stay, which was pretty amazing. So we understood from a micro preemie standpoint that these boys would probably be on oxygen going home. So we never really expected for them to be off of it. So we did get home with Luke. He had been in the NICU for 114 days at that point. So he was able to come home. It was right before Thanksgiving that year, I can remember. And as every new parent, you start those sleepless nights again, and then you add on making sure they're wearing their oxygen, and the oxygen alarm going off all the time still is very exhausting. And I think the pressure is really on, because when they were in the NICU, yes, you're worried about them, certainly at the beginning, but when they were getting ready to near discharge, you don't really worry about them as much. I think you're ready for them to be home, but when they finally get home, I think the reality sets in that, oh, okay, so I'm the only one here now. There's no NICU nurse, there's no respiratory therapist, there's nobody else here. And that was very frightening. So on one hand, I was very devastated that Levi couldn't come home, but on the other hand, it was nice to be able to adjust to just Luke and getting that whole feel down. And any parent that's come home with a kid on oxygen, my gosh, they come out of the nose like all the time. I mean, it's just a constant battle to keep that in their nose. And then, all the wires still to deal with is very frustrating because it's just not what you envisioned, right?
Right.
When you bring your baby home, you didn't envision there being alarms and wires still. And that's, I think, something that, again, we just had to accept and move on. And you almost mourn the loss of kind of a normal homecoming. But at the same time, when you're in a NICU, you tend to see families that have suffered much greater than you, and suffered certainly the loss of a child. So I think for David and I, we felt very guilty almost for, being upset that they were just on oxygen. We just thought, we're so blessed to be even here, so we're not going to complain about that, right? But it's still challenging. Fortunately, Levi did well after that, and he was able to come home on his, I think it was 126 days that he was in the NICU. So at that point, we were all home, and I think 2 babies with wires and oxygen tanks and alarms was very new, and
a toddler.
it's difficult because, and a toddler who freaked out at the alarm sounds every time they went off. It's like your house alarm going off. It's very loud.
Yeah.
So that was hard, but fortunately everybody seemed to adjust. I think the other thing you think about too, when I had Mason, I could carry him to the kitchen or carry him to his room, and that was it. And with Luke and Levi, you have to carry them and make sure their oxygen cord is not wrapped around anything, or get their oxygen and move it with, and then you have to move the alarm. And the logistics of everything is so very different from bringing a baby home without all that.
Right.
It's just, I do think on some hand, you get used to it and it does become second nature. But when you first get home and getting adjusted to all of that, I do think you have to give yourself a lot of grace, because it is going to be an adjustment. And I do think you have to stop and recognize this is going to be different maybe than the vision that I had in my head of what coming home was going to look like. Mm-hmm. And I'll say for some parents that we've met in the NICU, I think it was easier. And some parents, that was absolutely devastating, that they're now bringing home a kid that has these medical needs that's, so different than the vision and the hope that you had for your kid. And I think reaching out to other NICU parents and having that support and being able to be in support of one another while you're in the NICU is not only helpful while you're there. I will say it's helpful when you get discharged. We still have relationships with some of those NICU families, and there's a bond there that nobody else can really appreciate. And so I think that helps as well, kind of getting the NICU families, if they want, right, together and communicating, especially the moms. I think the whole breastfeeding drama and all the stress with that. Mm-hmm. Because for me, like I couldn't breastfeed them. I had to pump the whole time, and that is just not an enjoyable process, or I didn't enjoy it personally. I was very excited to throw my breast pump away. I think that was one of the happiest days of my life. But, there's a lot of stress on being able to breastfeed preemies as well, because you feel like they need that nutrition, right? And you don't want to have to use donor milk, or you don't want to have to use formula because you're told like this is what's going to be best for them, but that just adds another kind of level of stress. So I think it was very helpful to have that support even after we got discharged, to be able to reach out to different families and kind of communicate with them and be able to lean on each other when there was still those uncertain times afterwards.
That's such a good point, because it's not just when you're in it, it's after too, and the after effects of it. And, you're just talking, you're constantly having to change your perspective and your expectations. It's, you've already had to make a sacrifice in this area. Okay, it wasn't the birth I wanted. Okay, it's not the coming home I wanted. Okay, it's not, you're constantly having to do that. And there's not many other people in the world who can get that, as much as they love you and support you. But having somebody literally who's gone through it can be so necessary. absolutely necessary. I feel like I
Yeah,
could talk to you all
absolutely.
night long. I want to hear about Luke and Levi now. Like, I know it's like a quick fast forward, but can you give us a brief update on how they are and what they're up to?
Oh, sure. Luke and Levi, they are 3-year-old boys. So our house is very energetic, very crazy. We are fortunate that their medical needs have, well, Luke's have pretty much subsided. He was cleared from pulmonology and cardiology and the developmental doctors as well. So we've been cleared. He had a preemies tend to have smaller ear canals, so he was not hearing very well for a while. So his speech is a little delayed, but other than that, he's doing really, really well. The Levi is doing amazing as well. His lungs are not as great. We started them in daycare when they turned 2. I think with micro preemies in particular, they'll tell you they don't really need to be out in the world for a couple years.
Mm-hmm.
So we lived a very, I should say, pandemic life before the pandemic hit this year.
Mm-hmm.
So we are not, we're very used to that kind of being at home all the time and somewhat isolated feel. But when we started them in daycare, we were so excited. And as every daycare parent knows, that first year they get sick all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they did. And every time Levi got sick, his lungs would flare up like you would think of like an asthma flare. And we would end up either in the ER or admitted to the hospital with low oxygen and fast breathing. And he did end up hospitalized for over a week with RSV, which as a preemie parent, you fear RSV when you get discharged. Luckily, he was already 2 when he got it, but we still had a rough course with that. So we've had some challenges with Levi's lungs, but since we pulled them out of school because of COVID, he's done beautifully because he hasn't, knock on wood, gotten sick. So that's really the main medical issue that we've had, and we recognize the blessing of that we're not having to deal with much else for the 2 of them. So they've done really beautifully, and they're amazing and very different personalities and still bonded like twins. I think that was one thing I was worried because they really lived separately for a good part of their lives initially, and they're very much still twins, and they are really a joy. Honestly, I think they've really completed our family, and we feel so very thankful that we have them and that they're here with us and that they're relatively healthy. I think they've brought a lot of perspective into our lives that we didn't have before, and so I think there's really some good that came out of their journey. So we're very blessed to have those 2 sweet boys, and their big brother is the best big brother ever. I'll say he's very, very patient with them. Aww. Because he needs to be. But yeah, we're very, very, very blessed and very thankful for them and their health.
Well, I would add to, you give so much credit to, your faith and the NICU team and the care that they received. But just listening to you, Amanda, speak, there's just no doubt that you and David as their parents is another huge reason that they have just done so well. And the way that you're speaking and looking back on your experience, it feels like it's kind of flooding back to you. You know what I mean? It feels like with the accuracy and detail that you remember of, your ultrasound at 20 weeks and the discharge home and that walk down the hallway, like those moments don't leave you, and that just shows the imprint that they have on your heart and how lucky they are to have you as their mom.
Oh, you're so sweet. Aww. I think that's just most NICU parents will say, I mean, you're given this child, and at some point you accept the circumstances and you wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, they've blessed your life in a way that you didn't intend them to. So I think I pray we've done what any other parent would do. And I think it doesn't make it any less of a challenging experience. I think when I talk about my nightmares that I had, and, there's certainly things about our NICU days that I don't remember fondly and that do bring up some real sadness and just, I don't want to say despair, but I mean,
Sure.
there were some rough times and I do think with time, like anything else, it does get easier, but it's still very raw at times. And I think for us, it's really, like I said, given us a perspective of thankfulness and recognizing the blessings that we do have, because we've seen worse times, as a family. We've kind of lived through that. So I think one of the great things about our faith is you can look back on these times and have those sweet memories, because you realize what you've been brought out of and how you've been blessed through that journey that when you were in it was very, very hard. But we're able to look back on it now with joy and thankfulness, because we're very blessed. So, but I appreciate you saying that.
Of course. Well, it's like that grace you talked about, giving yourself grace when you came home. And when you and I first asked you if you would share on the podcast, you had said, I think there's been enough time. I'm ready to talk about it, but it's giving yourself that time to not think about it if you have to, or seek help, talk to other parents, reach out to your doctor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just being willing
Absolutely.
to have all that stuff be okay as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's just a time where you have to realize that it's okay for your weakness to be shown. We all have things that we deal with, maybe not as well as we would like to deal with them. And I do think the NICU is one of the best places, I think, where I've seen parents, you just put all your pride away and this is who you are. And I think for me, I needed to take care of myself in order to take care of my kids. And that becomes pretty apparent very quickly in the NICU when you're under such stress and uncertainty. I think you have to get to a place where you can take care of yourself, whatever that looks like. I think for David, it looked different than what it did for me. As a couple, it was different.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I do think you're right. Reaching out to people that you need to be reaching out to, whether that be a friend in the NICU, your mom, your sister, your doctor, somebody that can help, because it's not a normal process to go through. And your whole life, you've been trained to think, right, this is how I'm going to have my baby and this is what it's going to look like. And when it's not that way, it's a very devastating reality. But we're very lucky and blessed that we made it through, and we're on the other side. I think certainly we're happy to have that chapter,
Yes.
that chapter done. But
would you mind sharing your Instagram if people are interested in following with you and seeing how the boys are doing, or even just being able to reach out to you if they had any questions?
Oh, sure. Yeah. My Instagram, do you call it name?
Yeah.
Instagram name?
Yeah. Perfect.
Me and technology are not like super tight. AB as in boy, Thomas 415 is my Instagram.
Okay.
And absolutely, people can certainly reach out. I like I said, every baby's journey is very different. Every family's journey through the NICU is very different. So it's not all the same, but certainly we've been there and we understand parts of maybe what other people are going through. And so anything really to help support those people that are presently going through it. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Levi and Luke and Mason and David, and just your whole family for being so vulnerable and courageous and talking about these experiences. I have no doubt there's a family who's going to listen and feel connected to what you're saying, and then within themselves see a lot of the experiences that you've had. So thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor, and you can follow us at Child Life On Call on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please rate and review to make it easier for other families to find us. We have cute merch available at www.bonfire.com/store/childlifeoncall, and you can listen to more episodes and find resources at childlifepodcast.com.